Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a discussion with respect to the challenges being faced by Indian cities and the way forward for a robust urban ecosystem. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the importance of the constitutional office of the Deputy Speaker of Lok Sabha. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a discussion with respect to 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2025, along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of the day, this is with respect to are India's cities future ready? Since the start of 21st century, what we have observed is that there has been a rapid urbanization in India. And different governments, be it at the union level or the state level, they have come up with their own policies, programs and missions to give impetus to this aspect of urbanization. But urbanization in India has had its own issues. For example, the infrastructure deficit, for example, the capacity constraints or constraints with respect to the finances. In addition to that, because of the human-induced climate change, what we often call as the anthropogenic climate change, we are witnessing some of the peculiar issues. For example, there has been the rising water shortages in the country. There has been a rising electricity demand. Now, again, what we are trying to say is that we have this Sustainable Development Goal 11, which talks about creating urban environments which are inclusive, which are safe, which are resilient, which are sustainable by the year 2030. But the question arises, how would we convert this into reality? Now, again, the particular article, this column, it focuses upon the climate change related aspect. But what I'll try to do is I'll look at the urbanization in a very comprehensive manner. And then we'll have a discussion with respect to that. We'll see what is the trend of urbanization the world over. What is the trend of urbanization in India? What are the challenges which this concept of urbanization faces in India? And what can be the way forward, right? So it would be a very comprehensive discussion. Now, this is a part of GS1-3 with respect to urbanization and climate change. Now, let's first define what do we mean by urbanization. See, when you have the movement of people from the rural areas to the urban areas, what you call this phenomena as urbanization. That is one thing. Second thing which you have to understand is that this is a global phenomena. And it coincides with the economic development. And it has a feedback relation. What I'm trying to say is, as you have economic development, you witness more of urbanization. Also, as you have more urbanization, it transcends or it converts into more of economic development. So there is a feedback relation. Now, if I talk about the numbers, just look at this particular picture. The share of the urban population worldwide. Look at this. In 1980, the share was just 39%. Global level. Then in 2015, at the global level, you had 54%. And in 2050, the projected is going to be 66%, right? Look at this particular picture, which is provided by the United Nations World Urbanization Prospects 2018 report. See, we have categorized different urban areas into different cities. For example, let's say the urban settlements, the regional cities, the mid-sized cities, the large cities and megacities. For example, you have the Christchurch as an example for urban settlement. Then you have the Liverpool as an example of regional cities. And then you have, for example, the Brisbane as an example of mid-sized cities. And then you have Hong Kong as an example of large cities. And ultimately, you have the cities like New York as megacities. Look at this. In 1990, the megacities were 10 in number. And it is projected to go to 43 by the year 2030. The same goes with the other kinds of urban settlements. Look at this. The urban settlements, the regional cities, it would increase from 301 to 710. And the number of large cities would increase from 21 to 66. So urbanization is a reality the world over. Also, this is a very good infographic, which basically tells us the comparative analysis between the rural population and the urban population. So around 2009, what you see is that the world's urban population surpassed the portion of the people living in rural areas. This was basically the inflection point. And just see, by 2050, what is going to happen is that we'll have urban population to a tune of almost 7 billion. And we will have the rural population at the level of 3 billion, right? So this is going to be the scenario. Now, again, understand. When I talk about India, you have a particular number which is given by the United Nations Population Fund Agency. which says that as of 2023, the urban population in India as a proportion of the total population was 44%. So this was in 2023. It's a very good data and you can definitely use it in your mains answer. So in 2023, according to the United Nations Population Fund Agency, the urban population as a proportion of the total population was 44%. And it is going to increase to almost 68% of the total population by the year 2050. So this is what you have to understand. Now, when I talk about the urbanization in India, what is the legal and institutional framework? See, the very first is the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. This basically constitutionalized the urban framework, the urban governance in the country. Next aspect is Article 243W. This talks about the power, authorities and responsibilities of these municipalities. And it also says that the state legislatures can basically endow these municipalities with sufficient powers so that they can function as unit of self-governance. That is what you have to understand. Next, we have the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. See, when we talk about the overall policy formulation at the national level, we have the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. That is what you have to understand, the nodal ministry with respect to the urbanization. Then we have the Town Planning Acts and Development Authorities Act by different states. You must have seen in the district where you live, there would be a district development authority, right? So that is based upon a statutory law, which is made by the state legislature, which provides the overall framework with respect to the urbanization, right? The authority which is to be given to a particular body. Then we have the municipalities. Please understand, municipalities are those instruments which are at the forefront of urbanization. They are the ones which basically interact, which have a direct interaction with the people. Nagar panchayats, municipal corporations. Then we have the National Building Code, very, very important. So this is basically a building standard, right? And it is prescribed by the Bureau of Indian Standards. Tell me whether Bureau of Indian Standards is a statutory body or not. Do let me know in the comment section. So this is prescribed by the Bureau of Indian Standards. It basically talks about different norms. For example, what is going to be the structural norm of a particular building? Structural norm, right? So when I'm talking about the structural norm, for example, let's say, what is going to be, let's say if in a particular area, if there's an earthquake, how the building is going to be made so that it can be made more resilient. It includes the fire safety norms. It includes the accessibility norms. Right? Why we're talking about accessibility is because in order to make sure that whether the particular building is accessible with respect to the persons with disabilities, right? And understand that National Building Code is mandatory. Different buildings, all the buildings are basically, they have to be compliant with respect to National Building Code. Then we have the building bylaws. When I'm talking about building bylaws, it is nothing but an extension of the National Building Code. It basically talks about what should be the floor size, how these stairs should be made, again prescribed by the respective state governments. This is the overall legal and institutional structure. Now, let's talk about India, a very good infographic. Just see this. So the urban and rural population in India, if you just look here, especially since 2010, what we are witnessing is that there has been a sudden increase. There has been a decrease in the overall population, rural population as a component of the total population, and there has been an increase in that of the urban population. And this would continue. As I told you, I gave you the numbers with respect to the United Nations Population Fund Agency, right? Look at this infographic, very, very important. So what it says is that the annual urban population growth rate for India, you can see it's much more than the world average. Then it says, very important, 17 of the 20 fastest growing cities globally between 2019 and 2035 will be in India. The information is being provided by the Union Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Then 70% of the jobs will be generated in cities by 2030. They will contribute to almost 70% of GDP. Look at the kind of contributions which these urban areas are going to have. 29%, almost 30% of the India's urban population lives in slums. This is a very concerning point. Then 98% of the urban households have access to electricity. 91% get potable water. So still you have a good section of the society in the urban areas which does not have access to safe quality drinking water, right? Now, you can just have the look at the other information, least urbanized states, for example, Himachal Pradesh, Bihar, most urbanized states. And then it also talks about the increasing, the trend which is going to be there. Now, when I talk about the infrastructure requirements, now it is but obvious. If you're going to have a rising urban population, consequently, you need more of infrastructure, more of robust infrastructure, right? So what is going to be the infrastructure requirement? According to the World Bank, the studies which it has done, what it says is that the infrastructure development in India, it would have a financial requirement of almost 70 lakh crore by the year 2036. A very important data. So the total amount, the total finances which are required for the infrastructure development by the year 2036 would be almost 70 lakh crores. And this tunes to almost 4 lakh crore annually. This is what you have to understand. Next aspect is that if I talk about the sectoral allocation, what is going to be the sectoral allocation of this particular finance? 50% would go to the basic urban services, be it the sanitation, the urban amenities, solid waste management, and the 50% would go into the urban transport, the metros, the rails. You must have heard about the mass rapid transit systems, right? So very, very important component. So there would be a 50-50 allocation. Next, if I talk about the current investment levels, what you have to understand is that in the year 2018, there was a total investment of almost 1.3 lakh crores. But again, as I told you, according to the World Bank, there is a need of almost 4.6 lakh crore annually. And we are giving almost 1.3 lakh crores. So there is a very big deficit, right? And this is just 27% of the overall required amount. This is what you have to understand. Now, what are the issues being faced by the cities in India? What are the challenges being faced by the urban environment? The very first is unplanned urban sprawl. According to a data by Niti Aayog, what it says is that almost 40% of the towns in the country, they do not have a master plan. Now you would say, what is master plan and what is the importance of master plan? Master plan basically incorporates the trajectory or how the development is going to take place in a particular area. It incorporates the needs and aspirations of the people living in a particular area. So if you do not have the adequate master plan, do you think that we would be able to have a robust development? Absolutely not. And ultimately what happens is that because of that, there is even the lack of basic amenities, be it the drinking water facilities or even the sanitation facilities like public toilets. Next, we have the traffic congestions. Why do we have traffic congestions in the urban areas? Primarily because of the unplanned road network. The road network is not planned. It's haphazard. Next aspect is that of the inadequate usage of public transport systems. People are more dependent upon their own vehicles. They're not inclined to use the public transportation system. As a result, the traffic congestion increases. And in addition, the pollution load also increases. Next, we have the encroachment of green spaces. Very, very important point. You must have seen this news or heard about the urban floods. That we have had the urban floods in different areas, in different cities around the country. For example, we had urban floods in Chennai, we had in Hyderabad. What is the prime reason? See, the prime reason is the encroachment of green spaces, and I'll tell you why. We have local authorities in different cities, and then we have real estate mafias. What is happening is that there is a development of illicit nexus between the local authorities and the real estate mafias. And because of that, these areas around the rivers, around the water bodies, where the development ideally should not take place, where the construction should not take place, over there, the construction is taking place. Just imagine a particular river passing by and there is pristine, sacred, the banks of the river. And over there, the construction is taking place. And ultimately what happens is that whenever you have sudden erratic rainfall, the water is unable to percolate. And ultimately it results into the urban floods, right? So what we are witnessing is that there has been an increasing privatization, commodification of the land as a resource. That is one of the reasons. Next, we have the issue with respect to the affordable housing shortages. According to the India Brand Equity Foundation, what it says is that in the year 2019, there was the shortage of almost 2 crores houses, affordable houses. That is according to the India Brand Equity Foundation. And ultimately what happens is because of that, there is the unsustainable growth of slums. Just before a few days, we had such a bad fire incident in the Rohini, in the slums. So this is again a very grave concern. Ultimately understand that if you have the growth of these slums, it leads to more of social conflicts because these slums are the breeding grounds of different crimes. Drug trafficking or other crimes, right? Or the crimes against women. So it also leads to social conflicts in the society. Next, high economic burden. Once you'll have, majority of the people living in the country, they are from the low middle income areas in that particular domain. And they do not have the adequate economic capacity to go for a particular affordable housing, right? So again, when majority of their resources are being spent on the house, definitely it leads to a lot of economic burden for this particular section of the society. Next, we have inadequate infrastructure. Infrastructure issues with respect to the solid waste management, adequate roads or power utilities or electricity lines. We do not have that. And this increases inequality. Why? As I just told you, that ultimately you have the lower sections, the poor or the lower middle income class, which is basically dependent upon these public services. And once we don't have the adequate public services, definitely it basically costs to these people. It increases the inequality. Then there is lack of public participation. According to a very important non-profit organization, Transparency International, what it has said is that the urban development in India has been top-down, has been non-participatory. That is, people are not the equal stakeholders. Decisions are being taken by the central government or the state governments or the local authorities. There is no adequate participation of the people. That is one of the very important concerns. And because of that, ultimately what happens is that it leads to the exclusion of the community needs. What is really the need of the people? That is not being considered. Next aspect is hampered decision making. As I told you, because of this illicit nexus, because of the corruption involved in the local authorities, the decision making is not quick. Moreover, these local authorities are dependent upon the state governments, and there is too much of corruption which is involved. There have been allegations. Then, environment degradation, which even this particular article talks about. What we are witnessing is that because of the unsustainable growth in these cities, there are issues like traffic congestions. I told you, because of the traffic congestions, what it leads to is increased pollution load. There is vehicular exhaust, giving pollutions like you have the sulfur dioxide or the carbon monoxide or this suspended particulate matters. So this increases the overall pollution levels in the area and it affects the air quality, ultimately having a negative influence on the health of the people. So it's a public health concern, right? Increases the risk of non-communicable diseases. That is what you have to understand. Then there is inadequate solid waste management. You must have seen there is just littering around of waste in different areas. So timely, a pickup is not there of those waste by the local authorities. That is one of the very serious issues. Then we have concretization. Just before a few days, we talked about the concept of urban heat islands. Because of the increase in the usage of concretes, the gray and the black infrastructure, right, or the roads or the buildings, there is increased amount of heat which is trapped. And dissipation of heat doesn't take place. So it ultimately results into the increase in the overall temperatures in the urban areas. That is what the urban heat islands is all about. So it is because of the concretization, the increased concretization. Next is, what are the issues with respect to the finances? Very, very important concern. So again, if we talk about the municipal finances, there is this aspect of stagnant revenues. Municipal revenue as a proportion of the total GDP of the country, it's just 1%. Understand, majority of the development which is taking place with respect to the urban infrastructure, it is being taken place in the municipal areas. And they have just total revenue as a share of the overall GDP. It's just 1% of GDP. So they are dependent upon the state government or the union government for resources. That is a very serious concern. And see, look, this has been continuing since the year 2002. So this particular number, 1% of GDP, it has not increased. They do not have their own resources. Tax collection inefficiencies. So these municipalities, they can basically collect this property tax revenue. But as they're not utilizing their potential, they have a huge potential to collect these property tax. For example, we have the municipal corporations in Bengaluru and Jaipur. They're only collecting 5 to 20% of the potential which they have with respect to tax collection. Right, so this is a very serious issue, and it's the property tax revenue is just 0.15% of GDP. Next aspect is cost recovery. See, there is the cost which is involved with respect to providing different services, but there is no application of user fee. These municipalities are not collecting the adequate user fee. For example, be it with respect to the parking or be it with respect to the usage of public utilities. So ultimately, what happens is that they are into a loss, and then state governments need to give them money, or the union government has to give them money. This is a very serious issue, right? So the cost recovery is not there for almost 20 to 50% of the urban services. Next, inefficient fund utilization. On one hand, they do not have their own resources. Adequate resources are not there. And even for the resources which they have, they are not able to utilize it effectively, right? So almost there is the 23% of the municipal revenues of different municipalities in the country that has been unspent. And this is according to the 15th Finance Commission. Why this is so? Because of lack of capacity. Capacity is not there. Lack of decision making. You do not have the adequate number of professionals who are basically, they have skills with respect to the project management. So adequate capacity is not there with respect to the human resource. Second, they are mostly dependent upon the state government for the decision making. That is one of the very serious issues. Also for the very important schemes, flagship schemes, for example, the Amrut, Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation, or even the Smart Cities Mission. The amount which has been spent is only 80%. 20% has not been spent. And 30% has not been spent by different cities when we talk about the Smart Cities Mission. This is because of the inefficient usage of the revenues. Then we have decline in the PPPs. You would ask why PPPs are important. Public-private partnerships, they basically are important primarily because of two reasons. First, they provide the expertise. You have the private professionals who have expertise in the project management, in the finance management. So they can basically give that knowledge that how the project has to be delivered. Second, the public-private partnerships, they offer a diversified source of funding. So we are not just dependent upon the government sources. We can have private entities coming and contributing. But what we see is that the private investments have reduced a lot. For example, in 2012, with respect to the urban development, PPPs were to the tune of almost 8,300 crores and they have reduced to almost 467 crores by the year 2018. Why? What is the reason? Because these private entities, they think that the project has weak commercial viability. Timely permissions are not given, clearances are not given, right? And there are different delays. There are bureaucratic hurdles. So because of that, the private entities are not really interested in investing in these projects. Now, again, understand what can be the way forward. The very first is evidence-based planning. Very, very important. What we are trying to say is that there needs to be a robust data. That what is the status of different infrastructure projects in these cities so that we can have a proper planning. That how much amount of money is required, what should be the timelines, right? So data is very important. Also, data with respect to the demography, data with respect to the migration, right? So we need to know that what, how, and to what level, what is the quantum of migration which is taking place in the country, be it from the rural to the urban areas or from the urban to the rural areas. So that is a very important point. Also, the data with respect to the economic activities. We should know that how many of the people are employed in the formal activities or informal domains, right? And which are the areas in the cities where you see a lot of commercial activity. So data needs to be there. Also, we have had the World Bank. World Bank, on the basis of the data which was provided by the National Sample Survey Organization, what it came to the conclusion is that in the year 2021, almost 43% of the urban population, it was living in slums. So just understand, it used the data of NSSO to come to this particular conclusion. So there has to be a proper, robust usage of data, and accordingly the policies should be made. Next, master and strategic plan. As I told you, the very first point, there is a dire need to come up with these master plans. So that again, when we will have a master plan, there would be a clear trajectory of how the development should take place, right? There can be these master plans based on the population projections. Also, we know that according to the United Nations Population Fund Agency, in the year 2050, almost 70% of the population would be in the urban areas. So we can have these master plans which incorporate this particular aspect and then deliver the result. Next, we have the performance monitoring. Very, very important. There has to be a competitive performance monitoring of these urban areas. Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, it has been coming up with the ease of living index. What we are trying to say is that there has to be a more broad performance monitoring of these urban areas. Should include more key performance indicators. For example, what is the kind of air quality you have? What is the kind of water quality you are providing? Are there enough green spaces in the cities or not? How is the public transportation working? So these areas, these domains should be included in the performance monitoring system. Then we have infusing transparency in the overall working. As I told you, there is this illegal or illicit nexus between the local authorities and the real estate mafias. For that, in order to avoid that, we need to come up with single window clearances, where all the clearances are given at that particular single window itself, especially on the digital platforms. That is really the need of the hour. Also, there have to be clear categorization or declaration of no construction sites, especially in those pristine ecosystems, be it the river banks or the other areas or the forested areas, right? So that the environment is not disturbed. right? We have huge biodiversity. Recently, we had a particular case in the country where, there were the JCBs coming and uprooting the plants. So this has to be taken into consideration. Next, promoting sustainability. There has to be proper climate risk assessment. What I mean to say is there are different cities. There are cities in the, let's say, coastal areas. There are cities in the interior parts. Every city has its own risks. For example, a coastal city might have risk with respect to urban flooding, right? Or it might have issues with respect to the risk with respect to tsunamis. Or let's say a particular city in the interiors may have risk with respect to the droughts, right? So those risk assessments need to be made an integral part of the overall development, urban development paradigm. That is what we are trying to say. We need to integrate those aspects. Resource mapping should be done. That what are the different resources available in different urban areas? What is the level of water resource which is available? Be it the groundwater or the water which is there in the nearby rivers or canals, or be it with respect to the other resources. So resource mapping should be adequately there. Then utilizing the innovation and technology. We need to come up with different platforms. What we have seen is in many of the smart cities, we are basically utilizing technology for the traffic management. There is a use of artificial intelligence. There's a use of these cameras, sensors. This should be enhanced again, so as to make the whole process more efficient. Then, when we talk about the finances, what is really important is we need to have three types of measures: long-term, medium-term, and short-term. When we talk about the long-term measures, the very first is strengthening the institutional frameworks. We have the state finance commissions. Do tell me in the comment section the articles which talk about the state finance commissions. State finance commissions in many of the states, they are not being constituted on time. That's the first thing. And even when they're being constituted on time, their recommendations are not being properly heard. Their recommendations are not being incorporated into the overall development paradigm. So this is a very serious concern. What we need to do is we need to enhance the autonomy of these urban local bodies, so they are less dependent on the state government. And how we can do so? When they will have their own revenues, right? They need to basically garner, they need to utilize the potential which they have with respect to the enhancement of the tax revenues. Next, expanding the revenue sources. As I told you, the coverage needs to increase. Be it the property tax or the user fees for different services, be it the parking or be it the other services being offered by the urban local bodies. And there has to be collection efficiency. How we can have that? We can basically go with technology integration. Right? So adequate technology must be integrated into the overall process. Then we have the capacity building. When we talk about the personnel who are managing these urban local bodies, we need to make sure that they have adequate skills, specifically with respect to the finance management or project implementation. So this should be there, right? Adequate skills, if they're not there, obviously they won't be able to deliver on time. They won't be able to deliver with respect to the quality parameters. That is one of the very serious issues. Then what can be the medium-term measures? We need to develop a robust project pipeline. We are not having robust plans. We are not integrating the timelines on which we have to deliver. That is one of the very serious issues. And because of that, because of the delays involved in the process, the private capital is not coming. The private entities are not really interested because they do not see these projects as giving them benefits. Private entities, the most important objective is the profit. So if they'll see that there is a delay involved, there is red tapeism which is involved, bureaucratic hurdles which are involved, obviously they won't participate. Then we have leveraging the digital public infrastructure so that we can make the whole process more efficient. Integration of technology, which we already talked about. Then harness the land value, very, very important. We have these corridors of metros and rail. They should harness the land value. What we are trying to say? Let's say you have the railway stations, the metro stations. Over there, you have different hoardings, advertisement. So these are the sources of revenue, right? So we should explore more areas, more avenues where the land value can be captured and the urban local bodies can get more of the resources. Then we have short-term actions. The very first is efficient utilization of the existing funds. We already saw that almost 20% of the funds which were meant for Amrut and almost 30% for the smart cities missions, they're not being utilized. They haven't been utilized. So there has to be a proper utilization of the existing resources. Already the resources are less, and whatever resources you have, you're not utilizing that. So this is a very serious concern. Enhancing the cost recovery. For that, adequate number of user charges should be there. Be it for the parking, be it for any services, there has to be the imposition of the user charges, so that these urban local bodies have their own resources. They're not dependent upon either the central government or the state governments. See, what we are trying to say is, definitely we need to incorporate these aspects. If we have to realize the Sustainable Development Goal 11, which aims to create more resilient, more inclusive, more safe cities, we have to work upon these aspects. And definitely development has taken place. But there are serious issues. be it the finances, be it the capacity constraints, be it the infrastructure deficit, right? Or be it the corruption which is involved. So we need to work upon these directions, and this has to be incorporated into the overall policy objectives. Let's have a mains practice question. The sustainable youth urbanization is critical for India's economic growth, environmental security, and social equity. 3 points important. In this context, examine the major challenges to the sustainable urbanization in India and suggest a multi-pronged strategy to address them. So we have tried to cover the urbanization in a very comprehensive manner. Do try to write an answer with respect to this question. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also mention in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to vacant but vital, the Deputy Speaker. See, we have the Parliament of India, which is a bicameral structure. So we have the House of the People, what we call as the Lok Sabha, and we have the Council of States, what we call as the Raj Sabha. One question. Are the words Lok Sabha and Raj Sabha mentioned in the Constitution? Do let me know in the comment section. Now, the role of presiding officers in the Parliament becomes very important. Be it the Speaker, be it the Deputy Speaker, be the chairman of the Raj Sabha, or be the deputy chairman of the Raj Sabha. But what we have seen, in fact, in 17th Lok Sabha was that there was no election of deputy speaker. And till now, even in the 18th Lok Sabha, we are not having a particular person who has been elected as a deputy speaker. Now, again, this becomes a constitutional anomaly. This becomes a constitutional anomaly because the Constitution mandates that there shall be a speaker and deputy speaker. But we do not have one. Primarily, the reason is that we have a convention. We have a set convention that the speaker is normally from the ruling party or the coalition, ruling coalition, and the deputy speaker is normally from the opposition. Maybe that's the reason that there has not been the election which has taken place with respect to deputy speaker. Now, again, understand, this article becomes really important, and especially considering that you are going to have your prelims, there can be a possible question with respect to deputy speaker. So we will try to see what is the importance of deputy speaker, what are his powers, his importance, is he subordinate to speaker or not? So we'll have a discussion with respect to that, and what should be the way forward. Because this is a situation which is not really good for a healthy democracy like India. There has to be a deputy speaker. Now, when we talk about the constitutional importance of the deputy speaker, we have Article 93, which very clearly says that as soon as maybe, there has to be the election of speaker and deputy speaker. See, understand the whole scenario. Let's say you have a particular Lok Sabha, right? A particular Lok Sabha. Now, this particular Lok Sabha is dissolved. Either automatic dissolution, or let's say the president has dissolved. Does the speaker vacates his or her office? The answer is absolutely not. What happens is that the speaker continues to be in that particular position. Now, let's say you have the elections which have taken place for the newly Lok Sabha, and then you have a freshly, newly constituted Lok Sabha, which is there. The speaker of this particular Lok Sabha vacates his or her office just before the first sitting of the newly constituted Lok Sabha. Now, what happens is that you have a particular person who is appointed by the president as the speaker pro tem for a temporary period. Primarily, the objective or the duties of that person is to make sure that there is the proper proceeding of the oaths. Then what happens is that you have the president who basically notifies the date of election of the speaker. And then you have the speaker who is elected. After you have the speaker who is elected, it is constitutionally mandated that the speaker should basically decide the date of election of deputy speaker. But that has not taken place either in the 17th Lok Sabha or even till now in the 18th Lok Sabha. This is a very important concern, right? So we just have the speaker and we have the panel of 10 chairpersons. We do not have a deputy speaker. That is really very important. If I just go by the verbatim language of the Constitution, what it says is, it talks about the speaker and deputy speaker of the House of People. The House of the People, what we call as the Lok Sabha, shall as soon as may be choose 2 members of the House to be respectively the speaker and deputy speaker thereof, and so often as the office of the speaker or deputy speaker becomes vacant, the House shall choose another member to be speaker or deputy speaker as the case may be. So there has to be a timely election with respect to either the speaker or the deputy speaker. Now, we have the other provisions which talks about the vacation or let's say the resignation or removal of the offices of the speaker and deputy speaker. So there are primarily three ways in which the office can be vacated, be it for the speaker or the deputy speaker. A member holding the office of the speaker or deputy speaker of the House of People shall vacate his or her office if he ceases to be a member. How a person can cease to be a member? If he or she is disqualified. Next, may at that time by writing under his hand addressed, if such a member is speaker, to the deputy speaker, and if such a member is deputy speaker, to the speaker, resign. So when we talk about the resignation, what you have to understand is that if the speaker has to resign from that particular position, he has to submit the resignation to deputy speaker. Very important point. And if the deputy speaker has to resign, he has to submit the resignation to the speaker. What it signifies? That the position of deputy speaker is not subordinate to the speaker. Because if the speaker is resigning, he or she is submitting the resignation to the deputy speaker. And if the deputy speaker wants to resign, he or she is submitting the resignation to the speaker. That is what you have to understand. This signifies the importance of the position of the deputy speaker in the constitutional terms, right? So we have the next aspect, may be removed from his office by a resolution of the House of the People passed by a majority of all the then members. What the word all the then members means? It basically means the effective majority, right? Do remember. So if there's a question that how the speaker or the deputy speaker is removed, on what majority, it is the effective majority that you have to understand. So deputy speaker remains until resignation, removal, or loss of membership. Now see, again, what I have tried to do is, we have the rules of procedure and the conduct of business in the Lok Sabha. There are very few, there are very important points which are mentioned in the rules of procedure. I have taken these snippets and I'll explain or make you understand that what these provisions talk about. So we have the provision 8 subclause 1, which basically says that the election of the deputy speaker shall be held on such a date as a speaker may fix, and the Secretary General shall send to every member notice of this particular date. What do we know from this? That when we talk about the election, the date of the election of the speaker, it is decided by the president. But when we talk about the date of election of the deputy speaker, it is decided by the speaker. And primarily you have the opposition, which is saying that the speaker hasn't notified the date of the election of the deputy speaker. And because of that, we had no elections. And therefore, we do not have a particular person who has been elected as a deputy speaker. Next, we have nomination of panel of chairpersons. I've already told you that you have the speaker who nominates a panel of 10 chairpersons who basically are from amongst the house. And let's say you have the speaker who is absent, or let's say in addition to the speaker, you also have the deputy speaker who is absent. So in that particular case, any of these 10 people can basically preside over the Lok Sabha. But a question which I want to ask, let's say that the office of the speaker as well as the deputy speaker, they are vacant. I'm not saying absent. I have told you vacant. See, if the speaker is absent, in addition, the deputy speaker is absent, definitely any of these panel of the 10 chairpersons can preside over the meeting of the Lok Sabha. But again, let's say if both these are vacant, who would preside the meeting? Do let me know in the comment section, right? Very, very important. Let me tell you the answer. It's basically a person who is appointed by the president. In case of vacancy of speaker and deputy speaker, a person appointed by the president basically presides over the Lok Sabha. At the commencement of the House or from the time to time, as the case may be, the speaker shall nominate from amongst the members a panel of not more than 10 chairpersons, any one of whom may preside over the House in the absence of the speaker and the deputy speaker, when so requested by the speaker, or in the absence of speaker by the deputy speaker. Then we have the rule number 10, which says the deputy speaker or any other member competent to preside over the sitting of the House under the Constitution or these rules shall have the same powers as that of the speaker when presiding, and all references to the speaker in these rules shall in these circumstances be deemed to be references to any such person so presiding. What do we, what lesson we can make from this? What we are trying to actually say is, when you have the deputy speaker sitting in the House and you have the speaker presiding, he acts as a normal member. But when you have the speaker who is vacant, or let's say the speaker is absent, and in that case, if the deputy speaker is coming and presiding, he would have all the power of that particular chair, right? So he would be in a position to maintain the order and decorum of the House. He would interpret the provisions of the Constitution of India, the provisions with respect to the rules of procedure or other parliamentary conventions. He would have absolute powers with respect to the management of decorum in the particular House. That is what you have to understand. And it is for that reason we also say that the deputy speaker is not subordinate to speaker. Next, when we talk about the joint sitting, so we all know that the speaker is the one who presides over the joint sitting of the two houses. But let's say if you have the speaker who is not there, then in that case, the deputy speaker of the house, or even if that person is absent, in that particular case, the deputy chairman of the council, and even if the deputy chairman of the Raj Sabha is absent, you will have a particular person who shall be appointed to preside over the joint sitting of the house, and this would be decided by the members present in that particular sitting. Then we have the removal with respect to the of the speaker and the deputy speaker. What I want to specify over here is that there are two very important points which you must understand, which are mentioned in the rule number 200. The very first is that if you want to initiate a motion with respect to the removal of either the speaker or the deputy speaker, 14 days advance notice is really needed. 14 days advance notice. And it needs the support of 50 members. If you want to take the leave of the house, the permission of the house, you need the support of 50 members. So support of 50 members and 14 days advance notice, it is a condition which you have to understand with respect to the removal of speaker and deputy speaker. Next, we have the chairperson of committee. So we all know that the deputy speaker has a special privilege, that if he or she is a member of a particular parliamentary committee, he or she naturally becomes the chairman of that particular parliamentary committee. That is given in the rule 258 of the rules of procedure and the conduct of business. It says the chairman of a committee shall be appointed by the speaker from amongst the members of the committee. And then the next part says, provided that the deputy speaker in case is a member of the committee shall be appointed as the chairperson of the committee. Very, very important points. Probably a question can come in the prelims. So just have a reference of that. Now, what is the relevance of deputy speaker in the parliamentary practice? See, we all know that speaker cannot be there 24/7, right? There might be a situation when the speaker is absent or the position of the speaker is vacant. So in order to provide the continuity, the office of deputy speaker is very, very important. That is what the article is even trying to say. He cannot preside continuously, the speaker, and deputy speaker is really important when we are talking about the uninterrupted sessions in order to provide that continuity to the functioning of the Lok Sabha. Next aspect is that once you have the deputy speaker taking over as at the position of the speaker, he would basically make sure that he can preside over the important debates and the committees. So, we need to have different perspective. It cannot be like always, there is a perspective of the speaker which is really needed. There should be an added perspective, and that can be provided by the deputy speaker. Because through convention, what we generally say is that by convention, we have the speaker from the ruling party or coalition, and we have the deputy speaker from the opposition. That is very important. Expected to be impartial after election like the speaker. So we know that independence and impartiality are sine qua non. They are very, very important to the office of the speaker or deputy speaker. If the deputy speaker is presiding, definitely that also becomes very important. But there have been allegations that the speaker hasn't basically followed the principles. Many a times in the political history of the country, the speaker has not followed. There have been allegations, has not followed the conventions or the established principles of impartiality and independence. So this becomes really important. As the convention says, that the office of the deputy speaker post goes to the opposition to maintain the bipartisan respect, though it is not legally binding. So if there's a statement in the exam which says, according to the constitution, the post of the deputy speaker goes to the opposition, is it correct? Absolutely incorrect, right? Growing constitutional vacuum, as I told you, that it has been vacant since 2019. In 17 Lok Sabha, there was no deputy speaker. And it has continued even in the 18th Lok Sabha. This is a very, very serious concern, and this is a constitutional anomaly because this is a situation which is abnormal. It shouldn't have taken place, right? Longest vacancy ever, a constitutional anomaly, weakens the institutional safeguards, centralizes the power. Why? Because you have the speaker who's from the ruling party. So this is a kind of a centralizing tendency which we are witnessing, right? There is the dominance of a particular party, and which is obviously not good. If you are, understand, constructive criticism is very important pillar of a democracy. I'm not talking about the criticism. I'm saying constructive criticism. And for that, you need to have a person. You need to have a person from the opposition as a deputy speaker. And we are not having that situation right now. Risks confusion during the emergency. Let's say you have the position of the speaker which is vacant. What would happen? So this is a very serious issue. It disregards the constitutional conventions. There is no importance which is being given to the constitutional provisions. Ideally, the speaker should have notified the date of election of the deputy speaker, but he hasn't done so. So this is a very grave situation with respect to the constitutional aspect. Undermines the parliamentary norms. democratic principles. Denial of the deputy speaker role, again, what it would do, it would increase the polarization. Please understand. Because again, you have the opposition, which already has a lot of issues with the government. Maybe correct or maybe incorrect. But the point is, if you're not having the position of deputy speaker, it would enhance the polarization. It would increase the frustration. It would lead to more interruptions in the debates, right? And there would be more chaos in the house. So there has to be the election of the deputy speaker as soon as possible. Proposals can be that there can be the amendment to the constitutional language to specify a strict timeline. There can be a particular clause. There can be, an addition of this particular timeline that after the speaker is elected, there has to be a 60 days window within which the election of the deputy speaker should take place. This can be one of the way forwards. Or introduce a statutory mechanism empowering the president to initiate the election on the government advice. Maybe the president can basically ask the council of ministers that please make sure that in the parliament you have the election of the deputy speaker. These are all just suggestions and they can be used as a way forward. Current ambiguity, this situation, it is unsuitable for a healthy democracy like India. Absolutely, it's something which goes against the democratic principles. Because again, see, if I'm saying you have the speaker and you have the deputy speaker, what I'm trying to say is that this is not something which is like this. The importance of speaker is not more than that of deputy speaker. Both are equal. Both are equal. No one is subordinate. Deputy speaker is not subordinate to speaker. So there has to be a timely election of the deputy speaker so that we can make sure that the functioning of the Lok Sabha, it is based on democratic principles. It is based on those presiding officers who act as in an impartial manner, in an independent manner. So this is very important. Maybe a question in the prelims can come, and also we have a mains practice question. Let's see. The office of the deputy speaker of the Lok Sabha is a constitutional necessity, not a ceremonial formality. In this context, discuss the significance of the deputy speaker and analyze the constitutional, procedural and institutional implications of not electing one. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. Let's go to the simplified section. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which talks about the greenhouse gases emissions intensity and the carbon credit trading scheme. Let's talk about the basics, understand the basics and understand the gist of the article. See, we have different gases which are actually termed as greenhouse gases. Why? For example, we have carbon dioxide, we have carbon monoxide, we have methane, which basically enhance the overall warming. What it means is that these gases trap more of heat. So if you have the emissions of these gases, definitely the overall temperatures, the overall warming would increase. What we call as the global warming would increase. Now see, the source of these gases can either be natural or it can be with respect to a particular process which is being done by humans. What we call as the human induced. So in other words, we also say the anthropogenic causes. What we have found, especially since the industrial revolution, is that because of the human induced processes, because of the manufacturing and other reasons, there has been a tremendous and exponential rise in the greenhouse gases. So there has been the warming of the planet, the warming of the earth. And ultimately what we have seen is that there have been the ill effects of climate change, what we call as the human induced climate change, anthropogenic sources of climate change. That is what you have to understand. Now, there is one concept, what we call as the greenhouse gases emissions intensity. I'll try to explain. Let's say you have a particular process. Let's imagine that you are basically manufacturing cement, right? Now, let's say you have a particular industry in 1990, which is manufacturing 1 ton of cement and producing, let's say, 10 tons of carbon dioxide, right? So it was the year 1990, just a hypothetical situation that you have a particular cement manufacturing plant and it is producing 1 ton of cement, and in that process, it is totally emitting, in total it's emitting around 10 tons of CO2. Slowly what happens is, because of the restrictions imposed on this industry, because as we are becoming more environment friendly, we are trying to have different processes which are more sustainable. Because of these restrictions, this particular industry try to make its process more efficient. And as of now, let's say in 2025, the emissions which it is actually having with respect to the production of 1 ton of cement, let's say it's 5 tons of CO2. So what we are saying, there has been a reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions intensity, right? This is what basically is a result of the increase in the efficiency of the processes. That is what we call that there has been a reduction in the greenhouse gases emissions intensity. Previously in 1990, production of 1 ton of the cement was actually emitting around 10 tons of CO2. But now because of the more efficient processes involved, what we are seeing is that there has been a reduction to the tune of almost half. Almost 5 tons of CO2 is not being released. That is what the reduction in the emission intensity is all about. Now, why we are having this? Because of a particular mechanism, the carbon credit mechanism. You have the government and we have, let's say, different industries, industry A, industry B, right? And let's say that you have the government which is saying that you can only emit that much level of carbon. This is the limit to which you can emit different industries. That is your total package. Let's say you have a particular industry which breaches its limit, breaches this particular limit, and you have this industry which doesn't breaches. Ultimately, what happens is that it has additional carbon credits with it. It can basically sell these credits to this particular industry. And again, since this industry would sell, it would also get the benefits in the form of money. And again, this industry would be forced. Since it would have to pay to industry B, it would make sure that it also brings in efficiency in the overall process. This is what the mechanism of carbon credit in layman terms is all about. So this is what the greenhouse gas emissions intensity is all about. The overall objective is to reduce the intensity per product output. We need to reduce the emission intensity. We need to make the process more efficient. Second, how we can do that? Different governments around the world, they're using this carbon credit mechanism, that you are being given this much amount of credit. If you surpass, if you exceed, you'll have to buy the credit from the others. And it would force different enterprises, especially those energy intensive units, to make their process more efficient. What the news is all about, that we have the government which has come up with this particular notification with respect to the greenhouse gas emissions intensity target rules of 2025. So as to facilitate the process of carbon credit trading scheme. We have certain energy intensive industries, be it the cement industry or the aluminium manufacturing or the paper and pulp or the chlor-alkali. So there are restrictions being imposed on these industries. We also have a particular scheme which is Perform, Achieve and Trade, PAT scheme. Do read about it, right? So in addition to that, we are having this particular scheme so as to make sure that there is overall less greenhouse gas emissions and we meet our own targets of the NDCs, nationally determined contributions. So you must be aware that different countries, in accordance to the Paris Agreement, we have had our own targets, nationally determined contributions, that we are going to do this much with respect to the climate change. Make sure that climate change does not happen to the extent where it disturbs the overall balance, right? And we also have the Panch Amrit goals, which Prime Minister Modi laid down in the COP26. So this is the gist of the article. We'll try to see what other information is, but this is what we call as the greenhouse gas emissions intensity and the carbon credit mechanism. The government has notified the draft rules introducing the targets for the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions by obligated agencies in energy intensive sectors. So there are certain, it's not applicable to all the industries. There are certain energy intensive industries on which these rules are applicable. The draft greenhouse gases emissions intensity target rules 25 notified by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Do remember, so which is the ministry who has notified this? This is MOEFCC. On April 16, puts in place a compliance mechanism for the carbon credit trading scheme. The CCTS was launched to create a framework for the trading of carbon credits to facilitate the reduction of emissions in energy-intensive industries, as I just told you, and to support India's climate commitments under the Paris Agreement of 2015. The draft rules are open for objections and suggestions, and you have a 60 days window. What is meant by greenhouse gas emissions intensity? Let's focus upon this. Greenhouse gases are the gases that trap the heat in the atmosphere and contribute to the greenhouse effect, right? That raises the surface temperature on the earth. The 5 most abundant greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, N2O, and ozone. Do remember. So this is basically 5 most intensive greenhouse gases. Next, we have other greenhouse gases include synthetic fluorinated gases such as chlorofluorocarbons, and hydrochlorofluorocarbons used as refrigerants, right? Greenhouse gas emissions intensity is the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted per unit of product output, right? Let's say 1 ton of paper or 1 ton of aluminium. Previously, it was giving me 10 tons of CO2. Now, because of the efficiency, because of the more good processes involved, now the emissions has reduced. That is what the reduction in the emission intensity is all about. The amount of greenhouse gases that are released in the production of, say, 1 ton of cement, aluminium, or paper. The draft rules define GEI as greenhouse gas emissions intensity in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we use this particular unit, that is tons of CO2 equivalent. Equivalent output of product. Tons of CO2 equivalent or tons of carbon dioxide equivalent is a standard unit used to measure the impact of all greenhouse gases. So as to make a parity, see if a particular industry is emitting, let's say, carbon monoxide or methane, how to basically compare it with CO2. So we have this tons of CO2 equivalent. In addition to that, we do the calculations and then we reach to that particular number based on their potential to warm the planet. So what the rules say? The rules set forth the baseline emissions for 23-24 and define the gradual reduction for the years 2025, 26, 26, 27 as a part of the mechanism to make India's carbon credit trading scheme 2023 operational. So there have been a target which has been given to these energy intensive industries, that you have these targets for the next 3 years, and how you would basically facilitate? You would facilitate through the carbon credit trading scheme. The greenhouse gas intensity reduction targets and benchmarks have been set for the highly energy intensive industries, for example, aluminium, chlor-alkali, pulp and paper, cement industries. These targets are for a 2-year period starting in 25-26 and cover 282 entities. So we have different entities, for example, aluminium, cement, pulp and chlor-alkali. Large corporations that have been assigned targets are Vedanta, Hindalco, Bharat Aluminium and others. The rules also lay down the mechanism for industries to comply with these targets and specify the penalties for their failure to do so. If you really want to make industries more efficient, you'll have to also impose the penalties. Ki see, bhai, this is your limit. You cannot breach this. If you breach, you'll have to basically buy the different carbon credits, right? Or we'll impose penalties on you. This is what the government is doing. Why it is important to have the targets? The introduction of industry-specific targets is crucial to meet India's climate change goals. The ultimate objective is to push industries towards a low carbon growth trajectory so that their processes become more efficient, less polluting. Through reduction, removal or avoidance of greenhouse gas emissions, a cement plant, for example, can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions intensity by adopting cleaner, greener processes in various stages of production. It could also replace the use of coal with biomass. So if a particular industry needs the application of heat, why to use coal? Use the biomass or use the renewable sources of energy. That is what the transformation we want. And because of that, we are placing the restrictions. Rules aim to help the India meet its key commitment made under the Paris Agreement to reduce the emissions intensity of its GDP, the amount of energy used per unit of GDP by 45% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. An overall objective is to promote the adoption of sustainable cutting-edge technologies across traditionally high-emission industries for addressing the climate change. That is what the overall objective is. While targets have been set for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, for the first time, a scheme to improve energy efficiency known as the PAT, Perform, Achieve, Trade, has been running since 2012. And how do these rules tie to India's carbon credit trading scheme? The CCTA is established as a framework for generating, trading and using carbon credits certificate. Under Article 17 of the Kyoto Protocol, understand, we already had the Kyoto Protocol which was legally binding, but Paris Agreement is not legally binding, right? So Paris Agreement is basically the new version which we have followed after the Kyoto Protocol, right? And again, understand, it was a Kyoto Protocol which started this mechanism of carbon trading, right? Treaty that committed industrialized countries and economies in transition to limit and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with the agreed individual targets. Countries that have emissions unit to spare were, that is, if a particular industry were given some targets, right? And if it has performed exceptionally well, it has some credits, right? It can basically sell those credits to other industries who have surpassed their limits, breached their limits. Allowed to sell this excess capacity to countries that were over the targets. Industries will be issued carbon credits for cutting emissions intensity, which they can trade on India's carbon market. So you'll have particular exchanges where this carbon trading would take place. Industries that fail to meet their obligations under the carbon trading scheme would have to buy credits to meet their compliance or shortfall, or be penalized by the Central Pollution Control Board. So it would be CPCB, which would be basically penalizing these industries. Carbon credits are traded through the Indian Carbon Market Platform, with oversight of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Do read about it. Very important. BE. You must have seen the star rating on different electronics appliances through the BE. Under the Union Ministry of Power, the availability of credits provide industries with the incentive to decarbonize industries with the source resources to adopt clean technology that can use the credits to earn profits, while those with fewer resources can make shift gradually by buying the carbon credits. Similar carbon credits markets have been operational elsewhere. For example, we have in Europe, we have in China, where you have these carbon credit mechanism. Let's talk about that. What is the objective of the Paris Agreement? And let's have a comparative study with respect to Kyoto, right? So Kyoto Protocol was created in 97 and ratified in 2005, had the 2 periods from 97 till 2020, legally binding agreement to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions. Original commitment was to decrease the overall emissions by 5% from 1990 levels. Only required developed nations to reduce emissions. So it was basically not having any sort of commitment from the sides of the developing countries. Targets are set, but no determined time frame. Paris Agreement signed in November 16. New commitments are due every 5 years. So there would be a proper review mechanism which would be there. Not legally binding commitments to reduce the emissions and increase accountability. Overall goal is to limit the global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. So you already had pre-industrial levels, right? So it should not breach the 1.5 degree target. That is what the overall objective is through the Paris Agreement. Asks all nations to reduce the emissions. New set of targets are declared after every 5 years. So if you can just see the Paris Agreement key points, the very first is temperature. By the end of this century, by the year 2100, keep warming well below the 2 degrees Celsius and try to basically restrict it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Finance, rich countries must provide $100 billion from 2020 onwards as a floor amount to be updated by 2025. Differentiation, developed countries should take the lead. Again, understand, it is primarily, you have to basically, pay attention to this. It is primarily the developed countries who are responsible for the current state of the climate change. Because we have just started increasing our manufacturing, the overall processes, right? So that's the reason India always says, India talks about the common CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. That is, the responsibilities should be differentiated. We are not the one who has led to this particular situation. It is primarily the developed countries. So they should take the lead. That is what the differentiation is all about. And different countries should be, trying their level best on the basis of their respective capabilities, right? So India is not that much capable as the US is when we talk about mitigation of the climate change. So therefore, capabilities also become very important. Emissions objective, aim for greenhouse gas emissions to peak as soon as possible so that afterwards, after peaking, it basically reduces. Then burden sharing, the developed countries must provide the finances to different countries, be it the developing or the least developed. Review mechanism, a review after every 5 years would take place. Climate damage, so we have the loss and damage fund. So there are countries, especially the small island developing states, SIDS, who have suffered a lot of losses. So they need to be compensated. That is what the agreement talks about. Next aspect is that we have had our own NDCs, nationally determined contributions, in 2015, and they were then updated in 2022, right? So this becomes really very important. So we have had, there has been, and this has been taken from the PIB, and this dates to August 2022. India basically updated its nationally determined contributions, and this was communicated to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The updated NDC seeks to enhance India's contribution towards achievement of the strengthening of the global response with respect to the threat of climate change as agreed under the Paris Agreement. So we had India under the 26th Conference of Parties. We had the Panchamrit in the Glasgow, right, of the UNFCCC in Glasgow. Express its intent to intensify the climate action by presenting the 5 nectar elements, what we call as the Panchamrit, right? Now, again, earlier in 2015, India had its own nationally determined contributions. The 2015 NDC comprised of 8 goals. 3 of these have quantitative targets. They have a number in them. Up to 2030, namely, cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil sources to reach 40%. Reduce the emission intensity of GDP by 33% to 35% compared to 2005 levels, and creation of additional carbon sink from 2.5 to 3 billion tons. So this is a quantitative target we had, and now they were updated in the year 2022. As per the updated NDC, India now stands committed to reduce the emission intensity of its GDP by 45%. So this 33 to 35% has been enhanced to 45% by the year 2030. From 2005 levels, and achieve about 50% of cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil based sources. So previously it was basically 40%, and now we have increased it to 50%. Today's Approval also takes forward the Honorable Prime Minister's visions of sustainable lifestyle and climate justice to protect the poor and the vulnerable from the adverse impact of climate change. The updated NDCs reads to put forward the further and propagate a healthy, sustainable way of living based on traditions and values of conservation and modernization. So we have the mission lifestyle for environment. So we are trying to incorporate those activities in our daily life which are more sustainable in nature. So this is what you have to understand. Initially, the NDCs were given in 2015 and then they were updated in the year 2022. That is what you have to understand. As I told you, India has always been focusing upon the CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, so as to maintain more equity in the overall process. And this is another PIB column which I have taken the snippet. India achieves 2 targets of NDC as well ahead of time. So this was posted on 18 December 2023. As a part of UNFCCC and Paris Agreement, India submitted its first NDC in the year 2015, comprising inter alia the following: to reduce the emission intensity by 33 to 35% by the year 2030 from 2005 levels, to achieve the 40% of the cumulative electric power from the non-fossil fuel based energy sources by 2030. So if you see that these 2 targets have already been achieved. These 2 targets have been achieved well ahead of time. So as of 31st October 2023, the cumulative electric power installed from the non-fossil fuel based energy sources is 186. Now this skews to almost 43%, and initially the target was 40% according to 2015 NDC. As per the third national communication submitted by India to the UNFCCC in December 23, the emission intensity of GDP has been reduced by 33% between 2005 and 2019. So this you have to understand. It is basically an achievement, a big achievement of India. Now these are the Panchamrit, India's green commitments. The very first is 500 gigawatt of non-fossil energy capacity by 2030, 50% of energy from renewables by 2030, reduce carbon emissions by 1 billion tons by the year 2030, reduce carbon intensity of the economy by over 45%. See, slowly we are increasing from 33% to 40% to 45%. Net zero by 2070. What is net zero? That is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions which a particular area or a country is having. The similar amount is being absorbed. So ultimately we are net zero. Refers to a balance where emissions of greenhouse gas are offset by the absorption of an equivalent amount from the atmosphere. So we have different countries. We have India saying that we'll be achieving the net zero by 2070 as a part of Panchamrit. China has said that has pledged to be net zero by 2060. US has said to be net zero by 2050, and India has said to be net zero by 2070. This is what you need to know with respect to this article. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the very crucial aspect of center-state relations. Let's go to the gist of the article. We have had many states, primarily the opposition-ruled states, which have had their own concerns with the union government. For example, let's take the case of Tamil Nadu or Kerala. Primarily with respect to the approach taken by the governor in these states, there were issues. So you had the governor who was basically sitting on the bills indefinitely. Then you had other issues with respect to the NEET controversy, the language aspect. Recently, you had the controversy with respect to the delimitation or the imposition of a particular language through the use of national education policy, or with respect to the GHG compensation. So we have had a lot of issues, primarily in the context of those states which are being ruled by the opposition parties. So in this context, we have the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister who has appointed a particular committee under the chairmanship of the former Supreme Court Judge, Justice Kurian Joseph, in order to look into this aspect of center-state relations. See, already we had a very important commission, which was the Rajmanar Commission, which was well instituted in the 1960s and 70s, which dealt with the center-state relations. And now, again, we are finding that the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister who has instituted this. We'll talk about that. What is this aspect of center-state relations? See, the Constitution of India, it has a centralizing tendency, which already has been told by many of the political experts, be it the Granville Austin or be it Ever Jennings or be it Morris Jones. Point is that how to make sure, how to have a structure where the states have their own freedom to exercise the powers they have. Because what we have seen is that there has been many a times an arbitrary interference by the center. And this is especially with the instrument of the governor. So this is not something which is good for a kind of a federal polity we have, where the powers are divided by the constitution itself, right? So we'll see. We'll also talk about some of the very important other commissions, be it the Administrative Reforms Commission, the Sarkaria Commission, or the Punchi Commission. So more than half a century after it warned of creeping centralization, increasing centralization, Tamil Nadu report a long-forgotten report, that is the Tamil Nadu report, has resurfaced at the heart of India's ongoing federalism debate, right? So that is what we're talking about, the Raj Mannar Committee. Earlier this month, the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister, citing concerns over the erosion of the powers of the state, announced the formation of a high-level committee headed by the former Supreme Court Judge Justice Kurian Joseph to revisit the center-state relationships and suggest measures to strengthen the constitutional rights of the states. Back in 1969, Tamil Nadu's strongly federalist Chief Minister C.N. Annadurai had established the Center-State Relations Inquiry Committee under the leadership of Dr. P.V. Rajmanar, a former Chief Justice of Madras High Court. And this was asked to study the constitution and recommend steps to ensure the utmost autonomy of the state in the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, without prejudice to the integrity of the country as a whole. This was a very objective of the Rajmanar Committee. The Rajmanar Committee concluded, there has been a growing realization of the strong domination of center. Why this becomes really important is, guys, that these statements, these points can be very well used in your mains answers, right? As said by the Rajmanar Committee. So you can cite this. Strong domination of the center and the tendency on the part of the center to exercise control over the states, drastically affecting their autonomy, right? Administrative units of the center. The report complained that while the constitution is federal and it worked in a way that the states had practically become the administrative units of the center, and cited on page 18. The committee backed its claim with a detailed analysis of the provisions such as Article 256, 57, 65, which gave the center sweeping powers to issue directions to the states and enforce them through the precedence rule. So we know we already have these provisions, emergency provisions, or in fact some other provisions where the parliament becomes the overall encompassing body, right? So it can basically have a control. The whole structure changes to a unitary one. So these are the provisions which are mentioned in the constitution. And many times the governments at this union level have arbitrarily used these powers. So this is a point of concern. Article 365 highlights that the subordinate position of the states. This obviously results in the assumption of the legislative and executive powers of the state by the union. It recommended that Article 356, the provision which talks about the precedence rule in a state, should be repealed, should be removed completely, and that a strong interstate council be set up under Article 263 to resolve the differences through dialogues. So it gave importance to interstate council, constitutional body, very, very important. Control over money. The committee also criticized the institutions such as Planning Commission, which were created by an executive order. So what we have found, there were these allegations, and in one way or the other, it was also correct, that there was too much of dependence upon the Planning Commission, a body which was set up through the executive resolution, and not much of importance was given to the Finance Commission. So this is a very serious aspect. The center has got a whip in its hand because the grants are given by the center at its discretion. The plan allocation is left entirely to the whims and fancies of these people who are the members of these bodies. This, it said, had made the Finance Commission, which was a constitutional mandate, irrelevant. So you are making a particular constitutional body which is irrelevant, right? So you are making a body as an irrelevant, which ideally should be given the powers to deal with the finances. But you have made the Planning Commission as a more important body. And this we are talking about at that point of time. Worse, it had rendered the states suppliants for aids in their own jurisdiction. The report warned that the triple of central planning, massive grants, and party politics was eroding the federal balance. Very, very important. Meaning of the strength. The committee questioned the understanding of a strong center is essential for India's unity. By taking upon itself too many obligations, the center will become incurably weak. So the center cannot take upon itself everything. There has to be a proper division of powers. The strength, the true strength lay in restraint and clarity of purpose, not expansionism. Very important words. Another successor as Chief Minister, M. Karunanidhi, basically submitted the report to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1974. Tamil Nadu has had its own issues, for example, the NEET or GST or delimitation or language policy. By invoking the Rajmanar Committee, Stalin seeks not just policy reform but ideological realignment, returning to the Dravidian movement's core belief in state empowerment. So the very important base in Dravidian movement lied that we need to have our own autonomy. And now through these policies, through these actions, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu is basically going in the same direction. The Rajmanar report was never acted upon the center. Its recommendations, echoed later by the Sarkaria Commission, Punchi Commission, remain largely shelved. They have not been considered. Administrative Reforms Commission. The ARC was established by the Government of India in 1966 to review the public administration of India and recommend reforms. So the ARC submitted its report with respect to the center-state relations in 1969. recommendations, made several recommendations aimed at improving the relationship between the center and the states. First, it said that there has to be the establishment of interstate council for a more good coordination and collaboration between center and the state. Delegation of powers to the states. Center should not take everything on itself. It should delegate the powers which are ideally suited to the states. Augmenting the financial resources so that they can have their own development on the basis of the aspirations of the people in the state. Every state has its own requirement, so that is what the objective is. Review of central control over the states. Arbitrary control should not be placed over the states. Strengthening of local governments, very, very important, so as to promote the grassroots democracy. Ultimately, the people should decide that what they really need, and for that you need to have a very strong grassroots democracy, and for that you need to empower the local governments. Then we have Sarkariya Commission, established in 1983 to examine and review the working of the existing arrangement between the union and the states. So it's had a lot of recommendations. Some of the key recommendations, for example, governor's role, very, very important. What it specifically said is that he should refrain from interfering. And this is what we are finding it now. Governor is even interfering in day-to-day matters. He is basically a position which is supposed to act as a very impartial constitutional position. But he is acting as an agent of the center. This is what you have to understand. Legislative relations, concurrent list, clarify and define the division of legislative powers between the center and the states. Prior consultation, very important. Before the center is coming up with a particular legislation which can affect the states, there has to be a prior consultation. Financial impact, assess and compensate states for any financial burden. Administrative relations, central intervention, limit the center's power to deploy paramilitary forces. And if it is doing, it has to be based on the state's request. Consultation with the states is very important. Interstate councils, strengthen the interstate councils and zonal councils as platform for resolving the disputes. Then financial relations, finance commission, it should be given more credibility. Central grants, make central grants less discretionary and more formula based. So when they are discretionary, definitely the central government would have an edge. And there would be party politics which would be involved. So what we are trying to say is make them on formula base, which is prescribed by the Finance Commission. Debt management, coordinate and streamline the state's borrowing powers. Additional requirement, All India Services, review the recruitment and allocation of All India Services officers to ensure that every state have a say in their deployment. There should not be one-sided, push of these rules. Language policies, promote wider use of regional languages. Then you have strengthening of interstate council, the same thing. Addressing the interstate disputes. The National Development Council should be reconstituted and renamed as National Economic and Development Council. Very important. Should act as a forum for consultation and coordination between the center and the states on economic and development matters. Even in prelims, they have been asking questions with respect to the recommendations of these committee. And it is for that reason I have tried to give this. Protecting states' right. The Commission recommended that the central government should respect the rights of the states as enshrined in the Constitution. Ultimately, we had the Panchi Commission, very, very important. And this was basically instituted in the year 2010, right? And then it submitted its various reports. Key recommendations, National Integration Council, propose the creation of a superior entity, the National Integration Council, to address the internal security matters. Then amendment to Article 355 and 356. Recommended amendments to Article 355 and 356 of the Constitution, focusing upon the safeguarding of states' interests. There should not be one-sided imposition of the center's directive. There have to be a proper coordination with the states also. Then we have subjects in the concurrent list, advocated for the states to be consulted through the interstate council, appointment and removal of governor. Recommended that governors should abstain from active politics, should not involve in day-to-day politics or day-to-day governing of the states. It is ultimately the elected government in the state which should be taking the decisions, not the governor. Union's power of making treaties, advocated for regulating the union's treaty-making power concerning the matters in the state list. Then appointment of chief minister, called for a clear guideline to limit the governor's discretionary power. We all know that the range of discretionary power enjoyed by the governors, it is much more than that of the president. And many a times it has been used for the wrong cases. So therefore, there has to be a restriction on the usage of discretionary power with respect to the governor. Very, very important. Outlined a precedence for order for forming the state government based on largest pre-poll alliance, single largest party with support, post-poll alliance with a fewer party. So ultimately, there is no discretion which is involved. There has to be a particular formula, a particular way in which the governance is run. So this is what you have to understand with respect to this particular article. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. So we have one of the former ministers of Australia who has said that if you really want to exploit or capitalize upon the potential of IMEC, you need to basically keep agriculture out. Why? Because see, agriculture has its own concerns. Primarily in a country like India, we have our own concerns with respect to agriculture. We're not that productive, right? And again, the farmers are heavily dependent upon the state, and they are dependent for various subsidies and other things. So again, the very point is that if you want to, according to the minister, if you want to really capitalize upon the potential of IMEC, let the agriculture sector be out from it, right? So we'll see what IMEC is all about. We all know that this is a particular project which was basically, it was announced in the G20 summit, and the overall objective is to increase the connectivity, starting from the port of Mumbai and then to Piraeus port in Greece. So as to make the whole region more integrated, be it through the railways, be it through the sea connectivity, be it through the power lines. So to enhance the overall economic potential of the region. Because ultimately, when you will have more of economic activities, this would give a boost to the region, and different social conflicts, they would basically reduce. This is what the overall objective is. The India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor potential can be realized if Europe and India can find a common ground by keeping the agriculture sector aside. World is undergoing a third industrial revolution. The impact of artificial intelligence will be extraordinary. The UAE, Saudi Arabia are already trying to leverage their position to make sure that they are on the top of the AI. India is on the top when it comes to the talent pool related to AI. IMEC stands to achieve when this realizes this. State, we also have the Maharashtra Chief Minister who has said that, Devendra Fadnavis, who has said that the state would be a gateway for IMEC. Now, when we talk about IMEC, as I've already told you, it starts from the Mumbai port and Mundra port in Gujarat, and then it connects to the Jebel Ali port in UAE. Then via the land route, via the roadways and the railways, it's being connected to different ports in Saudi Arabia, be it Riyadh. And then ultimately we have the Haifa port in Israel. See, we have these different rivals, and because of the economic connectivity, they would be more integrated, and then this would lower down the kind of conflicts we have in the region. And ultimately, via the Haifa port, will connect to the Piraeus port in Greece and further to European countries. This is what the overall situation is. Launch announced during the G20 summit in New Delhi in September 23. Participants India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, EU, and the US. Many countries have also joined. Strengthen the economic connectivity and facilitate the trade, energy, digital cooperation between India, Middle East, and Europe to have that more integrated framework, right? More connectivity. Railway network connects Middle East countries, enhancing the regional connectivity, sea-link energy infrastructure pipelines with respect to, let's say, the oil pipelines or the renewable energies, different digital infrastructure to create a more robust digital public infrastructure, which can be used by different countries so as to have more interlinkages, right? Next, strategic importance, economic growth aims to boost trade and development. Geopolitical influence presents an alternative to China's BRI. China's BRI has not been good for many countries, primarily because of its debt trap diplomacy, and different countries are making sure that countries should not be more inclined to the Chinese BRI. They should have more sustainable options. And for that, we have also a particular certification mechanism. What we have is the Blue Dot Network. Blue Dot Network, very important for the upcoming prelims. Do read about it. Energy security helps in diversifying the energy sources, especially in renewable energy, and meets the regional energy requirements. Benefits for India, exports growth. It's definitely, once we'll have more connectivity, more economic opportunities, it would boost India's exports and give access to different markets in Middle East, job creation, digital expansion, opportunities for India's tech sector to expand in the Middle East. So we have a lot of talent, as said by the former minister. We have a lot of talent, especially in the digital domains. So why cannot we expand our market in these areas? Challenges, political instability. We all know what is happening with respect to the Palestine, what Israel is doing, and the region is very unstable, especially when we talk about the Houthis, right? Houthis, what is happening in Yemen, very, very important. Do read about Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. Do let me know that it lies between which two areas, right? Do let me know in the comment section. High costs, extensive financial and logistical resources. And again, when I talk about political instability, we also have what is happening in Iran. So you have tensions between US and Iran, and the region as a whole is quite unstable. Coordination, success hinges on the coordinated policies and continuous cooperation, but that is not possible because many times what we have seen is that there has been an antagonistic relation between different countries. Future prospects, IMEC could reshape the global trade patterns, enabling more stable and diversified supply chains and positioning India as a central hub in the growing transcontinental network. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the report by Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Now, again, understand what the report says is that in the year 2024, India's military expenditure was 9 times that of Pakistan. We already know that the current situation between India and Pakistan is quite bitter, primarily because of the sponsoring of terrorism by Pakistan and the kind of tragedy which we had in Pahalgam, right? So it was basically the terrorists who were trained, who were encouraged, radicalized in Pakistan, and then sent across the border to basically perpetrate this coward act, right? So what we are trying to say is that this particular article in that scenario gives us a lot of information. What it says is India's military spending in 2024 was nearly 9 times that of Pakistan's expenditure, way higher. Swedish think tank said amid the growing tensions between the two countries, the country's military expenditure, the 5th largest globally. So it is the 5th largest, India, you can see, grew by almost 1.6% to 86.1 billion US dollars, while Pakistan spent 10.2 US billion dollars. See, again, we need to understand they do not have even the basic resources, and whatever resources they have, the Pakistanis, they are basically using in the defense areas. They do not have even the adequate water sources. They do not have the electricity, nothing, absolutely all clear. So again, and still they are investing in these areas, knowing that India is far, far, far superior, right? The top 5 military spenders, the United States, China, Russia, Germany, and India, accounted for 60% of the global total, combined spending of almost 1,635 billion US dollars. China's military expenditure, it increased by 7% to almost 314 billion US dollars, quite more than that of India. China accounted for 50% of all the military spending in Asia and Oceania, more than 50% in this particular region. Can you imagine? Continued modernization of its military and expansion of its cyber warfare capabilities and nuclear arsenal. Trends in the world military expenditure 2024. Can you just have a look at the kind of expenditure which is borne by US? Way higher, right? SIPRI said that the military spending in Europe, including Russia, rose by 17%, and this was primarily because of the Russia-Ukraine conflicts. SIPRI also said that Russia's military expenditure reached an estimated 149 US billion dollars in 24, a 38% increase, and the double the level of 2015. 7.5% of Russia's GDP, the total expenditure, and 19% of all the Russian government spending. Russia is also going in the same direction. It has to basically do, because in order to secure its country. Ukraine's total military expenditure grew by 2.9% to $64.7 billion. So this is what you have to understand. Let's talk about SIPRI. So this is an independent international institute dedicated to research into conflict, armaments, arms control and disarmament. So its vision is a world in which sources of insecurity are identified and understood, conflicts are prevented and resolved, and peace is sustained. Maybe a question in the prelims can come with respect to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Mission: undertake research, provide policy analysis, facilitate dialogue, promote transparency, deliver authoritative information. Next aspect is that of history and funding. So this was established in 1966 on the basis of a decision taken by the Swedish Parliament and receives a substantial part to this day from the Swedish government. That is, you have to understand. Structure, its organizational structure comprises various governing board and director, deputy director, and others. International reach, located in Stockholm, Sweden, SIPRI offers a unique platform for researchers from different countries to work in close cooperation. So maybe it's a non-profit institute, very important, gives very important information with respect to the defense expenditure by different countries around the world. So maybe a question can come in the prelims. Let's go to the last article of the day. Coming to the last article of the day, this is with respect to a news coming from the South China Sea. So we already know that China has its own claim with respect to different territories in the South China Sea, different islands, reefs, shoals, right? So again, we have a particular Sandy Cay Reef, which is a disputed territory between Philippines and China. So this makes this particular area very, very important. China and Philippines on Monday defended their claims to a disputed reef in South China Sea. The Sandy Cay Reef lies near Thitu Island or Pagasa, where Philippines stations troops and maintains a coast guard. The Philippines and China have been engaged in months of confrontation in South China Sea. Now, please understand the whole picture. We have the South China Sea, and again, we have different countries. We have China, Vietnam, and others, Philippines, Malaysia. Different countries have their own claims, right? So you can just see we have these claims by Malaysia. If you look at the green part, if you look at the black part, it's by Brunei. We have the blue part by Philippines. So it says that the area which comes here, it comes under its own jurisdiction. Then we have by China. What you have to say is that China has its biggest claim, what you call as this particular. China says everything which lies over here, it's mine. Primarily what we call as the 9 dash line, right? So this is what you have to understand. So we have this 9 dash line, which basically Chinese authorities say that everything which comes under this, it's a part of Chinese sovereign territory. And because of this, a lot of disputes have taken place in this particular area. Primarily, the important areas are this Paracel Islands. You can just see it's over here. Then we have the Skarbug Shoal, primarily between Philippines and China. Then we have the Spratly Islands over here. This is what you have to understand. So again, these are the Chinese claims, the 9-dash line. And then you have the claims by different other countries. So there is the overlapping of these claims, and ultimately the disputes take place. If you just look at this, we have the Sandy Cape, which is in the news. And this is a part of Spratly Islands over here. So if you just look at the picture, we have the Spratly Islands, right? And this forms, near this, we have the Sandy Cape reefs. So ultimately, this becomes very important. We have the Gulf of Tonkin. We have the other areas, very, very important. We have the Senkaku Islands over here above Taiwan. So this area becomes very important. South China Sea is, again, it's a very important geographical area, primarily because of the kind of trade which takes place. More than $5 trillion of trade takes place annually. And again, you have the dominance of China. And ultimately, these skirmishes, these fights take place between the Coast Guard of China and the other countries. This is what you have to understand. Maybe a question can come with respect to Spratly, Paracel, or Scarborough Shoal, and even the Sandy Cape Islands or the reefs, which we have just talked about. So this is what you have to understand. Just have a track of this, that which all countries are involved in the dispute. So primarily, the dispute is in between the China and the other countries, right? China or Vietnam, China or Philippines, or China or Malaysia or other countries. This is what you have to understand. That's it for today. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the very best. Thank you so much.